I'm Jim Fisher with Fisher Compliance. Thanks for coming to my session today, and I thank DKF Solutions Group again for inviting me to speak. It's great to be out here with my own company, FisherCompliance.com. So I'm going to jump right into what we're going to do here. We have 4 areas we're going to cover, starting with how do you assess your SSMP? I get a lot of people calling saying, how do I look? I paid for this, or I did this myself, or I have no idea where I am on the compliance spectrum. How can I assess my SSMP? So I've got a couple of tips and tricks for that. A few other compliance tips. I'm doing an enforcement update for Regions 2 and Regions 9. And then I'll end with tips for resilience at the end. So on the assessment part, you take a look at your SSMP. I look at a lot of them. I'm going to walk through one of the best tools available, which is the State Water Board's Pre-Inspection Questionnaire, and how to use that, including the inside baseball on what gets checked, items you really want to pay attention to, items you don't really need to worry about, etc. So let's watch it now. I'm Jim Fisher of Fisher Compliance. In this video, I'll give a quick overview of the Pre-Inspection Questionnaire version 2. Water boards use this in 2 different ways. They use it for screening collection systems that they might want to know more information about and maybe inspect. And number 2, they use it when they go do an inspection to really help them guide the inspection. So really it's used both for screening and for the actual inspection. So it's a worthwhile document to do. Many of the agencies, like the city of Folsom comes to mind, have said this has really worked wonders for them in doing their audits, their SSMP audits. So it's a really good tool. It's not the only thing to be used in an audit, but it's a great tool to get started for agencies to use as a way to sort of help themselves and not have to rely on anybody else to really gather the critical compliance information for the sanitary sewer systems waste discharge requirements. So it's a really good tool. It's really worthwhile. I'm going to just walk through the basics of what this thing is. It's a beast. When you look at it, it's like 17 pages. Most of this is questions and answers, yes or no. However, there are some questions in here that you might stumble on and go, wow, that's a real zinger. And what I would recommend is to go ahead and write those down separately on a separate piece of paper, not in here, and just the things that are stumping you, go back and do later. But I would just say make a pass through this in a couple of hours to see if you can get, and a lot of this stuff like on the mapping, on the assets, this is the stuff that takes time to go look to see like how many miles, how many connections you have, how many, whatever. So that might take a while, but it's worthwhile, again, having that information. Some of this is really basic at the beginning. The financial information is another area they really tend to drill down on, because that economic benefit of non-compliance, that is in the water quality enforcement policy, and that is a really critical area for the board to review. If they're going to go look at a system, they're going to say, hey, were there any economic advantages to avoiding putting in that pump station upgrade, putting in that pipeline upgrade, training, you name it. And if they are going to take an enforcement action, they will look at all the possible financial impacts that could influence that the benefit of economic noncompliance. And that's a model put together by the US EPA. I can go into more detail on that in a future video, but just a heads up on this. The financial information is very critical to the audit and to the answers that are going to be reviewed in here. Some of this other information, local sewer use ordinances, that's more of just a checklist to make sure that you have everything in place. This is another one. The capital improvement plan is a super important one that the board, particularly the state board staff that act as consultants of the regions where I used to work, will really drill down on. So I've been talking with some of my clients. Most of the ones that I've been talking with already have a really good CIP. That's great, but expect to have answers be scrutinized on capital improvement plan, your financial, are you on the road to raising your rates if you need to? Do you have enough money? If you don't, are you on that path? So those are really critical areas. The CIP, again, is one that really always gets asked in every audit. So along with this one, obvious one, operations and maintenance. So again, there's some things in here that might take some time to get. It's more than worth it. Hop into it. Most of these other elements are going to be going through the SSMP requirements of the WDRs in provision D13. And so pretty straightforward. Another area, kind of a funny bone for the water boards, are to make sure that people have enough and have the right inventory of critical equipment and spare parts, because oftentimes a lot of excuses will come in. Hey, we didn't have that pump. It took us 2 days to get it. We didn't have a service contract in place to help us, with another excess, having more capacity to vacuum up a spill. So having these things done ahead of time, I can't stress enough. And having this major equipment inventory, again, some of the clients I've been talking with have pretty good lists. Some of them didn't have such good lists when we came in, and we were able to provide them with some specific recommendations on ones that could improve their system. But that's another big area here. Another one that's important to the board are the handoff points. If you're a satellite system, who are you handing off to? And is there a good amount of communication? And is there something documented that you're regularly communicating? You have a plan in place to who's going to respond to the spill, who's going to deal with a stoppage, who's going to deal with a repair? Is that shared? Is that sole responsibility of each agency? Is that figured out? Because some of the agencies have major handoff points, like the city of Folsom comes to mind, where they hand off the entire city to the Sacramento Area Sewer District, which is really a large pump station. And so that is a well-oiled machine. They have an agreement in place. They do regular training there. They have that all documented pretty well with those satellites. So again, that external communications, if you look at the order, it's pretty bare bones. It just says you have to have evidence of communication with your satellites. It doesn't say how, but that's the punchline on that one, is to really make sure that if you have handoff points, you have other places that are critical that could cause spills, that's been well thought out, and you have a plan in place, and maybe equipment in place too. And then these other ones are just, again, notification, reporting, record keeping, prevention and mitigation are, again, areas that the board is going to want to know. What are you doing with your programs? Are you being effective at preventing and mitigating SSOs? They acknowledge that SSOs are going to happen. All the boards do, the regional boards and the state board. However, if you get called on the carpet, like, we're going to take a look at you, we're going to do an audit, do you have a good way to explain the prevention, mitigation measures? Many of the people I'm helping haven't explained it very well. They have a little bit, we have these things, but they haven't really, they're doing more than they say on paper. So really having all that information in 15 together is super, super important. So now I'll just kind of walk through the questionnaire just to kind of give you a feel. Again, I'm going to really go through the ones that they're going to be asking a lot about, and it'd be these. Okay, so how are the sewer rates? Describe how much money you have. I mean, there's been agencies that, when I was an inspector for many years, had millions of dollars in the bank that were doing nothing. It takes a lot of work to program projects and to put projects in place and implement them and coordinate between engineering and operations. Some do it a lot better than others. So this is an area that the board knows about. Again, the ordinances are more just questions. Have you looked at your ordinance in 3 or 5 years, or is it 40 years old? Those are things to keep in mind. But again, this is one that will always be scrutinized heavily. What kind of a CIP do you have? Do you have a master plan? Do you have a CIP that looks backwards, that looks forward? The WDRs requires both an O&M and in capacity, and D13, that you have a short and long-term schedule for your projects. So be ready to give those to the inspector. Short-term, meaning a couple of years. Long-term, 5 to 10 years. Are you looking out that far? You should be at least looking out 5 years of what's coming up and what's projected. So they're going to look at this very critically. And if you want examples, you can go to the SSO library to see what they've done to ding people. And they've gotten a lot of dings out there in this area for CIP on the web. So feel free to take a look at that. This is the devil's in the details, of course, on your O&M program. This will probably take the longest to fill out, in addition to the mapping and metrics and things. But again, do your best on this. Air release valves are another area, force mains, that when I worked at the board, we found were really often ignored and not done much with, and are just ticking time bombs. So that's something to really keep an eye on. They're going to ask about ARVs. They're going to go look at, if you have air release valves, siphons, any kind of aerial crossings. I'm trying to think, large pump stations. They're going to go look. They're going to want to look at those. So that is definitely an area you want to be ready to showcase. You want to have your checklist there. You want to have your logbook. Your employees know what to say. If someone asks about, give me a tour of the station to an inspector, they better be ready to explain everything in the station. So that's kind of a no-brainer. The more critical assets are going to be drilled down on for an audit by them. So again, that's pretty good. A lot of the agencies don't have much problems with I&I. Many of them do. If you don't have problems with I&I, be ready to say we don't have many problems. We don't have a lot of capacity. We might have 3 or 4 choke points. We have CIP, or we're keeping an eye on it for future. That's great. If you do have an I&I problem, you should be able to explain that what you're doing, or you have sewer sheds that are divided up, that you're out there investigating, doing smoke testing, doing that evaluation to make sure that these spills don't happen. And if they are happening, you have a plan again in place that you're modifying over time to mitigate. Fats, oils, and grease. Again, if you have fats, oils, and grease, you have a lot of restaurants, this needs to be explained. A lot of times agencies, and you can look at your own data, or we can look at it for you, to really, with a push of a button, to tell you how many fog-related SSOs you're having. Are they recurring? Are they trending up? Are they trending down? If you do have a problem, if they're more than 20 or 30% of your overall 40% of your spills, you need to have a fog control program. Many agencies don't have this. They'll say, we have something. When you ask about it, can we please see your ordinance or your outreach plan? They really don't have much. So this is another area that could get asked about. Some of this is administrative. The contractors, they want to know, are other people in your system? Are you doing your own TV work in root control, or is it being outsourced? Are you just relying on Dukes to tell you where to go in the system, or are you actively doing your own root control mitigation, or at least being involved with the contractors to direct them where they're going? The other big area with the contractors are they often cause spills, as you know. So provision D8, I believe it is, proper O&M, including training for contractors, is required. So they will look at this also in great detail, along with to make sure the emergency response plan, item 9, is married to the SSMP and to any contracts that you have to make sure contractors are being trained. Training is another big one. Another one will say, the inspectors will ask how your staff are being trained to the managers, and then they will go out to ask the managers, or the staff, how are you being trained? Are the managers giving you what you need? So again, really having that training, being open to always more training, being open to being scrutinized in your training program, showing them records, not just sign-in sheets, but what was actually trained on, who trained, what was the content, those sort of things are what they're going to be asking about. So some of this other stuff, your major equipment inventory, probably won't be looked at too carefully. Your notification, record keeping, these are just more administrative. I mentioned earlier the communication program. Again, that upstream, particularly the downstream satellite, and the upstream, it could be if there is a spill, do you have a good program in place where you're communicating, you're taking responsibility, or you're at least communicating with the other agency to make sure that you're both on the same page when there's a spill, who responds, who reports, who documents, do you share that information, do you review that, do you peer review it? All those things are in place, particularly with the big assets at those locations. Last thing here to point out, just again, the prevention and mitigation I mentioned earlier. This will be things that if you're not doing, you can say, no, we're not doing these, but we have a plan in the next year or two to develop better SOPs, to develop better training materials. That's great. And we can help guide you when you get to the point of completing the questionnaire. We can help guide you with some of the answers here. You might maybe put these as placeholders to be revised after talking with Fishery Compliance about more best practice ways to answer these. Again, to give you the assurance that you have plenty of safety margin there with the compliance. You're not just meeting the minimum, but you're doing more than the minimum to ensure that you're being resilient and you can hold up to scrutiny. The last area, of course, is the declaration. The legally responsible official or officials can sign this. Again, the board really wants to make sure that who's ever filling this out is able to stand behind their data, and they'll again be able to use this as the platform, the springboard from in the inspection, which they often do. So again, you've got all the answers to the questions here. largely they're going to be asked. And with the exception of an individual spill or two, they want to know the details on records and volume estimation, of course, etc. But knowing this for the program audit part will get you the ball way down the field and get you in really good shape to having that, again, that compliance assurance, being ready for an inspector to come in to ask, or an NGO, or anybody else that wants to know what you're doing with your program. And it's a great tool for both helping you with the ongoing SSMP updates, the SSMP audit, and maybe even updating your board on a periodic basis, say once a year, on what you're doing. This is a great tool for that. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. So that's a really good way to evaluate your system, to really know the answers to the questions before the inspectors arrive, because this is ultimately what they use. Let's walk through a couple of other ways to, again, do your own assessment of your SSMP to see where you're at, including all these details. Where is your most likely locations for your next SSOs? This is often a question asked by inspectors and something to really be thinking about for your system. Have you checked your system for risk and threats? Do you know where these locations are? Are you collecting data on the climate impacts? You know, the Water Board is really big on this with their draft SSS WDRs, even though they're not official yet and there's no real move to show us a real draft that we've seen. Take a look here. This is an area, clearly a signal from them that they're going to focus on in the future. So this really is an area to be thinking about. If you haven't done any of this yet, how could you be affected, and are there ways to be more resilient for these areas? And another one here, predictive proactive monitoring. If you're collecting all this great data with SCADA, are you using it to really evaluate proactively how your systems are doing? And could you be doing more to evaluate those? Work programs, are they described adequately? Your inventories, your budgets and spending, alarms. These are all areas that, again, inspectors love to check, love to ask about. Again, you can be checking ahead of time to make sure you're at the best practice level or better. Mutual aid agreements for emergencies. Is your SSO audits complete and on time? Have you had them peer reviewed? You can have another agency. You don't need to bring somebody in, not necessarily from the outside world. You can have another agency review your SSMP audit or SSMP. Again, as a way to be ready for the regulatory inspection. And a review of the WDRs is a really good idea for your staff. Interviews, those sort of things. We're going to do a video on interviews for collection system workers in the future, so stay tuned for that. How do your spill reports look? Do they stand up on their own? Will they hold up to scrutiny? Very important area. A lot of the audits I've seen don't do this. We highly recommend that we're doing it as part of our audit process. Do engineering and operations collaborate? Backup systems, are those function and testing? You can take a look at some of the enforcement actions I'm going to show later for things that didn't work so well, again, as lessons learned. Are pumps well maintained, cleaned, and checked? Should you be collecting more data, like we said earlier, for proactive and predictive monitoring? Do you have public awareness efforts going on? Are your pipeline condition assessments up to par? Your fog control program? Are you actively working to enhance, clean up your enhanced maintenance areas? And how do things come on and off the list? That's an item that always gets asked. I remember inspecting, well over 100 systems, and that's one that really gets people caught off guard. Hey, can you tell us about your hotspot list? Well, why are those hotspots? How long have they been hotspots? You've been cleaning this pipe every week for the last 20 years. Why are you doing that? That kind of thing really gets asked by inspectors a lot, especially if there's a spill. Wet weather protocols before storms. Another one, again, if you're having capacity problems, what are things you can do ahead of time? A few other things here to leave you with. I won't go through every one of these, but I would recommend going through these after the video is over. If you really want to make sure you're at best practice level, do your own assessment, contact us for any questions. We'd be happy to elaborate on any of these here. I'm going to move now into the SSMP compliance tips, and I took a look here at sort of a higher level. What's the so what to checking compliance? You really have to know what enforcement orders are about, and I'm going to do that a lot here in the next several slides, along with the regional board enforcement pages. We mentioned earlier completing the pre-inspection questionnaire and doing spill reports. So as you can see, this is a really important sequence to keep familiar with in doing the compliance of your SSMP. So I'll step into a couple of those now. I took a look at some of the agency discharge compliance, non-discharge compliance, like your 3-day reports, your 15-day certifications for Cat 1s and 2s, your Cat 3 timeliness, your questionnaire timeliness every year. We have an actual tool that evaluates this for potential liabilities. So the agencies know, they have a heads up before anybody finds out if they need to correct something, etc. They have that available. So we have a tool. Most of the agencies, no surprise, from the conference here are in Region 2 and followed by Region 5 and Region 9. So I'm going to walk through some enforcement later on Region 2 and Region 9 just to keep everybody in those regions more aware. This is more detail of the tool I was talking about earlier that calculates the estimated liabilities and does a really good job estimating the rolling averages and comparing averages, if you will, with systems here at Alhambra City, with small, medium, and large. How do they compare and how are the rates look as part of the audits that we do? One of the other key outputs of the tool that we've developed is how do you comply with the non-discharge violations? Here, I was floored to see an agency here. They had 66, I picked a random agency, 66 bills, and out of those, 44% non-compliant between 2007 and present for the whole time the CWIC's reporting has been going on. That's a big number. 6% for Cat 2, 23% non-compliance for Cat 3. So this is something we can help with. You can also do this manually. We can teach you how to do that, but our tool, literally you click a button and it will show you the outputs of those results. A couple other things just to kind of point out in SSMP compliance. I highly recommend, this is an example to show on the right of doing more than the minimum. Again, you want to be best practice. You don't want to be at the minimum scraping by on the bottom. You want to have some safety margin. You want to come in there with resiliency for scrutiny. So if you take D13I, the goal is to provide a plan and schedule, proper operate, maintain, and manage. How do you do that? Well, you can do it by thinking about the other provisions. Inspectors also do this. They'll think outside the box of just that one area they're looking at. So provision D3, take all feasible steps. 4, in the event of an SSO, again, same thing. 8, properly operate. So you're looking more at the permit holistically and as a matrix rather than just one element on its own. I'm going to get into more of that in a minute here. And I always cite the sources that you're using for your audits. A lot of the audits we see results. Who came up with this? Well, John did. It's what he thinks is best practice. We really think to cite the sources, use an objective process. Again, the enforcement test at the water boards is what would a reasonable person do in this field of expertise, and that's what they use as a standard. A couple others just to show some of the outputs from our audits. The goals, are they effective? That's something that we're really looking at, the effectiveness for every element in the SSMP, along with are there any violations of the order? Are there any areas of concern to mimic the process that the State Water Board and the US EPA use? And finally, ending with some best practice suggestions for the agency to really make sure they're resilient and beyond the minimum compliance. And more importantly, they have meat on the bones to improve their SSMP and improve their program moving forward. Okay, we're now going to move into the next area, which is the enforcement update. I'm really excited to present some enforcement data. Again, for Regions 2 and 9, I think enforcement data is very important to review. I review it all the time. I did this on my job when I was at the water boards for many years, and do this now with my own company so that we're all aware of what the water boards is doing and more importantly, how they're doing it. So I'll step into some of that now. I'm going to show the San Francisco Regional Board data here. They've issued a slew of NOVs. If you're one of these agencies, and I didn't call anybody out here, these are just literally the counties here. But if you've had one of these, again, this is a signal that things aren't going in the right direction and to fix things. So I was surprised to see this many in the Region 2. The actual penalty actions, administrative civil liabilities are shown here. These are really important. An example here on the right, really important to really come out and take a look at these periodically, again, so that we're staying aware of what enforcement looks like to avoid it. And so there's many things to be learned from these activities. I highly recommend it. Here's the San Diego board, same thing. They're issuing NOVs. I actually listed them here again to give some of the agencies down there places to go to look for more examples. And you can search these in CWIX along with these penalty actions that have a lot of details about, and to reveal a lot about the inside of what they're doing, what they're considering for evidence. Again, how you can avoid getting one of these are all right here on CWIX. A couple of other ones. These are the Water Code section 13267, which is basically a technical investigation. The Water Board has the authority to say, we want to investigate you, you got a spill, or we want to know more about your system. They send these out very often. So I put up 5 examples here from Region 9. Moving now into how to prepare your audits a little better. I really like to emphasize for people I talk with, it's great to do good work on the 11 elements that are required, but don't forget about the other things in here. In D11, provision D11, which says the agency must develop and implement is the key in SSMP. That's the punchline, and that's the area on the inside baseball where the inspectors really want to know, are you implementing it? It looks great, but is it really being implemented? Are you really using it? And can you demonstrate that? Is it worn out from throwing around the truck? Does it have edits in it? Are you writing in it? Are you keeping maybe a track changes going in Word so you can do your own update yourself and not have to bring somebody in later? Those are the kind of things the board inspectors really want to see. They want to see evidence of that. So these items between 12 and 18 are really important, including the compliance with the monitoring and reporting program. I showed you the tool we have earlier. That's big too. That gets checked all the time and can certainly be used in an enforcement action as evidence to throw at an agency to say we think they deserve enforcement or not. I have a video that's up on YouTube that I'd just like to point out here for more on resilience that Sam Rose and I partner on a lot of projects. We developed this jointly for SCAP back in March. I highly recommend going and taking a look at it. I'll give the link later where that's available. So what do the audits look like at the end of the game? Well, our audits really, we're recommending, and we can teach people to do this as well. The desktop review, step 2, the pre-inspection conference, step 3, doing the compliance evaluation, step 4, the post-review of the audit, and 5, the final audit report. This standard of care is used as a way to really make sure that we're being thorough and that we're not just using best professional judgment. We actually have a process. This is put in by the US EPA 25 years ago. It was updated in 2017. You can download it. You can go through those steps yourself. You can bring somebody in to do it, but we recommend this process because this will ultimately, on the left here, will show you, are you being effective? Are you compliant? And having good references to those standards going through all these areas in the SSMP is what we recommend as part of the audit. So the compliance evaluation and inspection report is the centerpiece of our audits. We're actually using the US EPA manual. Again, you can download this. It was updated in 2017. Another area I'd like to go into are key performance indicators, and I'm going to show an example here for SSMPs. We think KPIs can be done for every element in the SSMP. There are definitely agencies out there that have done this, again, to keep their finger on the pulse of how their program is doing, maybe between the audits or the updates of the SSMP every 5 years. Keep your finger on all these things happening. I'm going to show you one example for goals. And so you say, yeah, I want to reduce spills. Well, how do you measure that? How much you transported to the treatment plant? How much was spilled versus balance recovered from spills? So number of SSOs prevented through preventative maintenance. Manhole blockages discovered before the SSO occurred. So these are examples just to point out. A lot of the agencies I remember at the board and even now may not be documenting a lot of this, and these might be missed opportunities you ought to be thinking about. Periodic alarm testings. How many alarms maybe saved you from a spill? Good data to have at your fingertips for an inspector. How to properly operate, maintain, and manage. The order is very vague, but how do you do that? Maybe annual review of your work plans. Checking to see if staff are adhering to those work plans. Checking your goals, modifications. Again, really measuring your effectiveness is important, not only to an inspector, but really is the goal of the whole SSMP, is to monitor what you're doing and make changes to be more effective. So we have a lot of training modules up on YouTube. You should use these for your staff, as a way to keep current on the order, I've got about maybe a 10 up there right now. I'll put this one up there as well, including a few on auditing tools for you DIYs and other information that we think is useful for staying aware of things to best practices and things to stay away from, I should say, to avoid enforcement or any kind of negative public attention. If you want to come and sign up on my website, I've got a subscribe area. Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions.